It's the Happy Families podcast. It's the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now.
The more anxiety we feel, the more controlling we'll be to our kids. And that control and overprotection can create shame and anxiety in them, which sets off a vicious cycle of negativity that we don't really need. It's not healthy for anybody.
And now here's the stars of our show, my mum and dad.
Hello, this is Dr. Justin Coulson, the founder of happyfamilies.com.au and Channel 9's parenting expert for parental guidance. Season 2 is getting closer. Mrs. Happy Families, Kylie, my wife, podcast partner, mum to our 6 children. You're sitting opposite me here at this desk as we record our podcast this morning, and you're shaking your head. You're looking at me through quizzical eyes. Is everything okay?
No, I'm actually just looking at all of the different mountain formations out the window.
Oh, wow. Okay. That's funny. I thought you were looking at me, but you're not. And now I'm disappointed. Kylie, we need to talk about anxiety. Anxiety is on the rise. We're seeing more and more studies showing that mums, dads, carers, children, adolescents, no matter where we look in Western society, we're seeing an increase, an uptick in anxiety. People are worried. People are fearful. People are apprehensive. People are in a chronic state of stress, believing that bad things are coming. I think it might have something to do with the fact that we're paying. You could literally buy a house for what it costs to eat a lettuce these days. I mean,
I was behind an older lady at the shopping centre the other day, and she obviously thought I saw what she paid for her groceries. I didn't. And she kind of turned to me and she said, it's almost impossible to eat healthy these days. And she kind of pointed to her trolley and she said it cost me $50. And she literally had a packet with the 2 small cos lettuces in it, a small piece of steak, two tomatoes, and I can't remember, but there was only a few other things. Like there was nothing in the trolley. I honestly, I could not believe that it cost that much.
Yeah. I mean, they're saying that some relief is on the way, but gee, it's a lot. But there's all sorts of other things that are prompting anxiety, right? We've got unaffordable
$2.28 for petrol.
Yeah, unaffordable housing. The kids are under pressure because we want them to do well at school. And then there's just the everyday life stuff, like relationships are tricky without all the extra pressure. Everyone's working too much. Everyone's always busy. And so today we thought we would have a conversation about anxiety. Are you an anxious parent? How do you know if you're an anxious parent? And is your anxiety having any impact on the way you're raising your kids or even your children's level of anxiety?
I thought it'd be really good to understand what anxiety actually is.
Well, the Australian Psychological Society defines anxiety as a natural and usually short-lived reaction to a stressful situation, and it's associated with feelings of worry or nervousness or apprehension. That's a direct quote because I use that quote all the time in my presentations about anxiety. So let me go through that bit by bit.
Well, what I love about that is literally the very first word is it's natural.
Right.
It's a natural feeling, emotion that we experience as a result of
a stressful situation.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we need to get clear on what natural means. That means that a lot of people say, I wish that I didn't have any anxiety. If you didn't have any anxiety, you would not have any risk aversion. You would have this constant sensation seeking where you were doing things that were really dangerous all the time. Anxiety.
I think we have a child like that.
A child who has
maybe 2.
No anxiety. She just goes for it. Anxiety keeps us safe. It keeps us away from the edge of the cliff, metaphorically and literally speaking. But here's the other thing. When you have a healthy form of anxiety, not only is it a naturally occurring emotion, but it's usually short-lived. And it's in reaction to that stressful event.
Well, not only in reaction to the stressful event, but an appropriate level.
Yeah, proportionally.
Yes.
Yeah, so if we look at what it means to experience stress, the best way to define stress is when there is some pressure or tension being exerted where you have to respond. Okay, so getting out of bed places stress on your legs. It's only a little bit of stress, and if we've looked after our bodies, our legs can handle that amount of stress, but there is stress being placed on those muscles, and that actually strengthens them. We do need to experience stress and stressful events in our lives because they strengthen us as well. So anxiety, natural and healthy, and usually short-lived in response to stress. The problem that we have with anxiety going haywire is when our anxiety is disproportionate to the issue. For example, you're at the park and your little one wants to play on the swing or the slippery dip and you freak out and say, no, you can't do that because you might get hurt. when everyone else with the same developmental capacity, same age, they're running around having fun, but you're being that helicopter parent. That's disproportionate response to a slightly stressful situation, a developmentally appropriate stressful situation. And so what happens when you're feeling that anxiety is you experience that fear, the feelings of worry, the apprehension, the fear, the nervousness. Again, they're normal, healthy feelings when they're proportionate and functional and keeping you safe. Unfortunately, this conversation matters because increasingly parents are experiencing anxiety, real anxiety that is not natural, that is not short-lived, and is not in the appropriate proportionate response to the level of stress that the situation demands. So that's what we're talking about.
So I'm wondering if there's any science on this.
So there's a research team in Amsterdam who have done a whole lot of study on this over the last couple of decades, really big research projects looking at the relationship between parental anxiety and child anxiety. And there's something fascinating about it. Brené Brown, actually, before I talk about the Amsterdam researchers, Brené Brown says, and I quote, "Anxiety is one of the most contagious emotions that we experience." And many mental health professionals and researchers believe that because anxiety is so contagious, it's rarely a function of individuals, it's a function of groups. Like dominoes, once a person's anxiety flares up, it's really hard for it not to spread. It's the contagion. And so you think about it, when you're talking to people and they say that they're really anxious about something, what happens? You start to worry if you should be anxious about it as well.
I'm thinking back to my high school days when I would, show up for an exam.
That's exactly what I was going to use, yeah.
And I wasn't stressed out at all. And then I would catch up with my friends and they had been up all night, studying like crazy, freaking out.
Did you study what was on page 42?
And here I am thinking, what am I missing?
Yeah.
I must have missed something. Maybe I'm not as well prepared as I thought I was. And so then my anxiety levels would go through the roof because they were anxious, not me.
And that's the same with our kids, right? Our kids catch our anxieties. But Van der Bruggen and these other researchers in Amsterdam, they discovered something really quite interesting. There's something that happens between, especially when anxiety is being passed from parent to child, there's something that happens in the middle. Let's go back to that example that I used in the park before. If you're watching your child move in the direction in the park that you're not comfortable with, you start to feel anxiety. And what do you do when you feel that anxiety?
Well, you usually freak out. Your emotions become quite big.
Yeah. Okay, so there's the nervousness, the apprehension, the fear, the worry. But then what do you do in relation to your child?
Well, you just stop them from doing what they want to do.
Okay, so when you step in and do that, there's a word for that, starts with C.
Well, we become more controlling.
Exactly. And so what Van der Bruggen and these other researchers in Amsterdam discovered is that there's actually a relationship between parental anxiety and parental control. The more anxious you are as a parent, the more controlling you are as a parent. But then the more controlling you are as a parent, what do you think it does to your child?
They become anxious. They become fearful.
Right.
Of the things that you're actually controlling. I've never thought about it as anxiety or anxious parenting. For me, it's been fearful based.
Right.
I think about my upbringing. I feel like my parents were fearful of what could happen.
Right.
The what ifs.
Yeah.
And so their control was like through the roof because they wanted to protect me.
Yeah.
I knew that and I understood that, but I just felt caged.
And so this is the difficulty with it, right? So this is well-intentioned parenting, and you are a good parent if you're protecting your child. Like, that's what we do as parents. We're supposed to protect our kids. The difficulty comes in when we start to protect our children in ways that are not healthy and functional, that are disproportionately high relative to the level of risk that our child faces. And that's where our anxiety leads to controlling parenting, which increases the anxiety in a child. And it increases the anxiety in the child for a couple of reasons, and I'm going to tell you what they are after the break. The 21st century is a tricky time to be a teen girl. Alcohol, drugs, mental health concerns, body image issues, technology, sex. Our daughters face all these and more. The Happy Families Misconnection Summit brings together the best modern-day experts on teen girls to show you how to stay connected with your daughter and help her face these challenges head-on. Available online via video at the Happy Families webshop.
It's the Happy Families podcast, the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now. And today we're talking about anxiety. and the challenges associated with that and how we can help our children navigate this if, as parents, we feel anxious.
So when we get anxious and our control goes up, our children catch that anxiety as well, and they catch it for a couple of reasons. One is they see our anxiety. They read our body language. They see that we're fearful, worried, or apprehensive, and so they start scanning the environment, worried that they've missed something in the environment that we're aware of.
Yeah, it's kind of like the exam.
Yeah. So there's the emotional contagion aspect. But there's another reason they get anxious.
They want to do what they want to do.
Okay, we could say that, but there's also another reason. So there's a third reason. I didn't think of that one.
I think they get stressed about the response.
Yes, they get worried they're in trouble because when we become anxious and overprotective and become quite controlling, we don't tend to speak softly, gently and kindly to our children. We tend to raise our voice, say, hey, stop that, come away from there. And it's almost like they're in trouble. They've done the wrong thing. And that increases their anxiety. Why? What happens actually is when a child gets into trouble, they start to feel shame. They feel like they're unworthy. They've done the wrong thing. They're not competent or capable. They're getting it all wrong in our eyes. And with that feeling of shame and worry, and fear that they're getting that wrong, they become increasingly anxious because they want to please us so much. They want our approval. They want to make sure they're going in the right direction. And so their anxiety increases that way as well, which of course puts them on edge and makes it even more likely that they'll do stuff that we don't approve of, which only repeats the cycle further and further. It's a vicious cycle. So when we look at the data, what we're really seeing is that emotions go up, intelligence goes down. That is, anxiety goes up and we become more controlling and then our kids catch our anxiety. Oh, but then once we see our kids are anxious, what do? We become more anxious. Oh my goodness, you're looking so worried. Should I be worried about the fact that you're worried? I think my child might have anxiety. I wonder where they got it from. Oh, did I just say that? Do you know what I mean? So that's what we're dealing with. Now we need to talk about some solutions here, some
Well,
ways.
it is the podcast for the time poor parent who just wants answers, honey.
So let's do this in like 3 minutes or less. Let's go through some solutions. I know that you've got a couple, and I've got a whole bunch of things that I want to say about what you've got to say.
Well, I found a clinical psychologist, Laura Kamea, and she actually says a big part of treatment for children with anxiety is actually teaching parents stress tolerance.
So the way that I say that, I'm so glad you used that. Stress tolerance is a beautiful phrase to remember here. Anxiety is about tolerating stress. Remember, anxiety is a natural and short-lived response to a stressful situation.
And stress is a natural part of life.
We need the stress so that we can grow, develop, get stronger, just like our muscles need stress to be bigger and better. So the way that I describe this is, as parents, we need to get comfortable with our children being uncomfortable.
Well, we need to get comfortable with ourselves being uncomfortable first.
We do, you're right.
Like it's us first. We can't help our children if we actually can't navigate this ourselves. And she actually goes on to say it's a simultaneous process. It's both directing the parent's anxiety and then how they can also support and scaffold the children's development of stress tolerance.
Oh, that's good. That's really good. I like that. You'll usually see that there's a gender bias here as well. Mums don't tend to tolerate that stress nearly as well as dads. Dads are much more inclined to encourage their children to take risks and bump up against the edges, find the boundaries.
So she actually came up with 5 things that can really help us navigate this space of anxiety and stress and help our children in the process. Number 1 was to learn what your triggers are.
Sure.
So if turning the news on and watching all of the devastation that is happening around the world is actually a trigger for your anxiety, then setting some boundaries around when and how you might engage in that if it's important for you is really important. Then the second one was to model stress tolerance. And what I loved about this was the fact that it's really important to acknowledge to our kids that we're experiencing emotions,
yes,
whether they're what you would consider normally talk about as being negative or positive emotions. Our children need to recognize and understand that this is actually a normal part of life and it's okay to experience them. If we constantly feel like we have to hide those commonly called negative emotions from our children, then what we actually model to them is it's not okay to have them.
Yeah, and when we model it, what we're actually doing is we're practicing having those emotions in healthy and functional ways. So there's a phrase that I like to use when I'm speaking out loud about how I'm feeling. I don't know if you've ever caught me using it around the house, but I'll often say something like, I'm beginning to notice that I'm getting stressed, or I'm starting to notice that. And so the key word here is starting to notice, beginning to notice. When we're beginning to notice, what we're actually doing is sort of stepping outside ourselves. So we're experiencing the emotion, but we're stepping outside of ourselves to talk about how we're experiencing it. And when we say it out loud, the kids get to hear it. They hear us practicing having the emotion in a healthy and functional way.
Yeah, I love it. And number 4 is to make a plan. If you recognize and know that your emotions get a little bit out of control when there's stress, understanding and knowing what your plan is to help you get through it can be really, really powerful.
A little while ago, I did a workshop about flipping the script, how we can stop yelling, the screaming spiral. And one of the central things that I emphasized is that under pressure, we revert to our most practiced habit. And if you want to stop yelling or stop having anxiety the way that it's interfering in healthy functioning, you need to have an alternative behavior to go to, and you've got to practice it and practice it and practice it, especially at times when you're not under pressure.
And I think that that's where that mindfulness practice, so often we think that, I'm feeling stressed, so I'm going to practice deep breathing. But if you haven't actually practiced deep breathing when you're not under stress, then it feels uncomfortable, it's not natural, and it actually doesn't do a lot to help you.
Spot on.
So creating some mindful practices that you just include in your everyday life, regardless of your stress levels, will go a long way to helping you in making that plan actually work for you.
Yeah, just practice keeping you cool, however you're going to do it. Work out what strategy works for you and practice it, because under pressure, you will revert to your most practiced habit.
And number 5, find a support system. We've talked about this a little bit, this acknowledgement that as parents, we feel like we have to do it all ourselves. But the reality is in seeking help and support from other people, we actually give them permission to be okay with their big emotions as well. And we can create that village that I talk about all the time.
Your support network only has to be 1 or 2 people. It doesn't have to be an entire village. Just 1 or 2 is enough. Let's wrap this up. Take home message. Anxiety is a natural and healthy short-lived response to stressful situations. We need to make sure that if we're experiencing any level of anxiety, that fear, worry and apprehension about the future, that it's proportionate to the situation that's in front of us. And we need to be aware that the more anxiety we feel, the more controlling we'll be to our kids. And that control and overprotection can create shame and anxiety in them, which sets off a vicious cycle of negativity that we don't really need. It's not healthy for anybody. So what do?
1, we learn our triggers. 2, we model stress tolerance. 3, we explain our anxiety. And number 4, make a plan. And number 5, find a support system.
The Happy Families podcast is produced by Justin Rulon from Bridge Media. Craig Bruce is our executive producer. Thanks so much for listening. We know that you could do any number of other things with your time, so we appreciate so very much that you listen to that podcast. If you enjoy it, please tell a friend about it. Leave us a 5-star rating and review so that the Apple algorithm can tell people about it. And for more information, visit us at happyfamilies.com.au.